Meet John Adams. He wasn't a glamorous hero. He was a grumpy, chubby farmer from Massachusetts. But John had a giant brain. He preferred reading giant law books over feeding the pigs. John became a lawyer. He was very loud, extremely stubborn, and loved arguing with people. Then he met Abigail. She was just as smart as him, and he loved her instantly. They got married. They were a perfect team. Abigail was his best friend and top advisor. Far away in England, a greedy king ruled America. He wanted more money. The king sent soldiers to force Americans to pay heavy, unfair taxes on everything. The Americans got very angry. One cold night in Boston, a terrible riot started. The panicked soldiers fired their guns into the crowd. 5 Americans died. It was called the Boston Massacre. Everyone wanted the soldiers hanged immediately, but John stepped up to defend the soldiers in court. Why? Because it was fair. His friends hated him for it. They called him a traitor. But John didn't care. John won the case. He proved the law was more important than an angry mob. The king kept pushing. So, Americans dumped the king's expensive tea into the ocean. The king lost his mind. He locked down Boston and sent an entire army. It was time for action. John packed his bags for a big meeting in Philadelphia. The ride was long, bumpy, and terrible. John complained the entire time. He arrived at Congress. It was full of men who loved to argue and do nothing. John yelled the loudest. He told them they needed to fight the king for freedom. The other politicians were terrified. They wanted to write nice letters to the king instead. John thought they were cowards. He knew war was coming, ready or not. Suddenly, news arrived. The British had attacked at Lexington and Concord. The war had started. John acted fast. He nominated a giant, quiet man named George Washington to lead their army. It was a genius choice. Everyone respected Washington. The American army was born. Now they needed a breakup letter to the king. John picked Thomas Jefferson to write it. Jefferson was shy and didn't want to. But John said, "You write 10 times better than me." So Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. It was a masterpiece. John gave the greatest speech of his life, convincing everyone to vote yes for freedom. They signed the paper. They were officially the United States of America. Bells rang across the country. John wrote to Abigail that this day would be celebrated forever. But declaring freedom was easy. Winning the war was incredibly hard. They were losing. Congress needed money and ships. They ordered John to sail to France for help. John had to leave his beloved Abigail again. It broke his heart. He took his young son. They sailed through a monstrous hurricane that almost sank them. They were chased by British warships. If caught, John would be hanged as a traitor. They survived and reached France. But John hated Paris. It was too fancy and silly. His partner there was Ben Franklin. Ben just partied, slept and flirted all day. John was a hard worker. Ben's laziness drove him absolutely crazy. They fought constantly. The French thought John was rude and annoying. They wouldn't help him. Sick of the French, John packed his bags and rode a horse to Holland instead. In Holland, John caught a terrible fever. He almost died, but he refused to quit. Sick and tired, he yelled at the Dutch bankers until they finally agreed to help. He secured a massive loan of gold. He single-handedly saved America from going bankrupt. Thanks to the money and French ships, Washington finally defeated the British Army. America won. John helped sign the peace treaty. The long war was finally over. John became America's first ambassador to England. He had to meet his old enemy, the king. It was very awkward, but they shook hands, showing respect between the two nations. Best of all, Abigail finally joined him in Europe. They were together again. After years away, John returned home to America as a famous hero. America held its first election. Washington became president. John came in second place. Second place meant becoming vice president. John thought it was the most useless job ever. The vice president wasn't allowed to do much. He sat in the Senate, totally ignored. For 8 years, John waited. Finally, Washington retired. It was John's turn to lead. John Adams became the second president of the United States. But trouble was brewing. France was having a violent revolution. They started attacking American ships in the ocean. Everyone in America screamed at John to declare war on France immediately. John wanted peace. He sent men to talk to France, but French spies demanded a bribe. The Americans said, "No way, not a penny." This was called the XYZ Affair. When America found out about the bribe, they were furious. They built a navy to fight. Even John's own friends demanded a war. But John knew America was too weak to fight. Risking his entire career, John bravely made a peace treaty with France anyway. He stopped a terrible war. It was the proudest moment of his life. But the people were mad he didn't fight. They called him weak and a coward. Feeling attacked, John made a huge mistake. He made it illegal to criticize the president. People went to jail just for writing bad things about him. Americans hated this. To make things worse, they had to move to the new capital city, a muddy swamp. The White House wasn't even finished. Abigail had to hang wet laundry in the empty halls. Election year came. Because of his unpopular laws, John lost the presidency to Thomas Jefferson. John was so heartbroken and bitter, he left town in the middle of the night. He didn't even attend Jefferson's party. He just went back to his farm to be a farmer again. For years, John stayed on his farm. He read books, rode horses, and finally relaxed. But tragedy struck. His beloved Abigail got sick and passed away. John was devastated. Without his best friend, John felt incredibly lonely. He missed her every single day. Then a miracle happened. His old rival, Thomas Jefferson, sent him a friendly letter. John wrote back. They forgave each other and became best friends all over again. For 14 years, the two old men wrote hundreds of letters about history and life. It was July 4th, exactly 50 years since they signed the Declaration of Independence. 90-year-old John Adams closed his eyes for the last time. His final words were, "Thomas Jefferson survives." But John was wrong. Thomas Jefferson had died just a few hours earlier, that exact same day. The two founding fathers, friends and rivals, left the world together on America's birthday. It was an unbelievable poetic ending to a legendary life. John Adams wasn't the tallest or the coolest. He was grumpy and loud. But without his loud voice and brilliant mind, America might never have been born. He was the stubborn engine of freedom, a true American hero.